This is episode 22 with Jennifer Todd. Welcome to the Sports Business Classroom audio experience. I'm your host, Sergio Millis, and each week I'll bring you an inspiring person or message to help you discover how to break in and succeed in sports and life. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and let the experience begin. This episode is brought to you by Sports Business Classroom 2020, an immersive sports business training and educational experience unlike any other, taking place July 12th through the 18th in Las Vegas during Summer League. Registration for the program opened last week, and ladies and gentlemen, you do not want to miss this. It truly is a one-of-a-kind learning opportunity for anyone interested in the business of basketball and jobs in sports in general. I mean, if you dream of one day landing a job in sports, are passionate about learning, or simply want to show the right people that you have what it takes to get a job in sports, this program is for you. Sports Business Classroom combines the best of all worlds into a single package. It's great academics, it's hands-on experience, it's immersion in the Las Vegas Summer League, and it's interaction with some of the best minds working in and around the NBA. You can check out all the details for the 2020 program at sportsbusinessclassroom.com, and if you're at all interested, make sure to apply as soon as possible, as this program will fill up. Again, the URL is www.sportsbusinessclassroom.com. Today's guest is the one and only Jennifer Todd, co-founder and executive vice president of strategic partnerships for the basketball tournament, a 5-on-5 winner-take-all tournament with a grand prize of $2 million. In her role as executive vice president of strategic partnerships, she manages the process of building and activating all sponsor and marketing relationships across TBT. Jenn is a fascinating and brilliant woman, and someone I have the utmost respect for. In this episode, we discuss her fascinating career path, how traveling to 35 countries has expanded her worldview, and how she became the co-founder of TBT. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not an episode you want to miss. There are so many lessons to be learned from Jennifer, and it is my hope that you'll listen to this episode and think deeply about how they can apply to your life. Without further ado, I give you Jennifer Todd. Jenn, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, no, I couldn't possibly be more excited to have you because you have had a super interesting career thus far and a very, very interesting journey. So I thought we'd start off with college. If I understand correctly, you went to Brown, but you didn't major in anything that would lead you towards sports.
No, I did not. When I was sort of, I don't know, pre-college, when maybe you have an idea of what you want to do with your life, I did not ever foresee having a career in sports. I went to Brown as a pre-med, so wanted to be a doctor. I was a gymnast growing up, so I was also a varsity gymnast at Brown. But I remember there was an Olympic gymnast when I was sort of in my, formative younger teen years, let's say, named Sabrina Marr. She was also Asian American. And she, after the Olympics, went on to become a doctor. I think that's her story. And I always sort of looked up to her, loved her story. I was really interested in medicine. And so I went to Brown as a pre-med. And, a lot of pre-meds major in biology. I have two scientist parents and a scientist brother. So there wasn't a lot of question whether I would major in science.
Right, makes sense.
I actually really wanted to study community health. And without completely throwing my parents under the bus, I did. They didn't think that was sort of serious enough. They really wanted me to study hard science. So I ended up being which is like under biology, it's community health. But I wanted, so I ended up being a straight bio major, and graduating with, a bachelor's of science in biology.
And then at some point you went on to get your MBA in management and strategy. At what point did you decide that your biology degree wasn't going to serve you in the way that you wanted it to?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a couple interesting things. I think Brown is some people know there aren't a lot of core requirements in the same way as some other liberal arts institutions have. So in my biology degree, um, I had, some English requirements, but there's no language requirement. This that I understand are more requirements at other schools. So I didn't take any business classes, but I actually didn't leave Brown thinking even then that I wanted to go on to business. Backing up a little bit, I went to Brown as a 17-year-old. So I skipped fifth grade, and I was always sort of the youngest and the last to do everything. Like I was the last person to get my license, my driver's license. I was the last person to be 21 and be able to drink, in fact, I turned 21 after I graduated from Brown. So I was sort of always the last to do everything. And that's sort of good and bad, right? Because I mean, there's a lot of people in front of you that you can watch, but at the same time, you always kind of feel like you're making decisions from, like, in hindsight, like you would have made a better decision if you had had a little bit more maturity or sort of innate direction. And so, I left Brown and wasn't ready to go to medical school, and thought that it might be interesting to try something different. So I went through the sort of typical Brown recruiting process and got a job in New York, working for a consulting firm called William Mercer. And kind of like without probably enough thought, I was like, well, it would be really interesting to live on my own in New York and take this consulting job in business and just, sort of see what that's like. Mostly more for the independence, I would say, like going to this big city, having grown up in Western Mass and going to school in Providence, like going to live in a big city on my own. So it was more about that. And I really, I was so unprepared for a business career. I think I was like, someone asked me to do a calculation when I was first there, and I was doing it by hand because I'd never used Excel, that kind of thing. Embarrassingly enough. So I just was, I learned quickly, but I was really like in an unfamiliar place when I was there, and being in a business environment. All my internships had been either following, shadowing doctors or doing biology research in a lab. So I'd never been in a business environment. I really was pretty blind to what I was getting into, but obviously great learning experience because it was so different from what I knew.
Yeah, and very impressive to be able to get a gig in consulting in business with a biology major and no other business experience.
Yeah, I guess so. I never looked at it that way, but yeah, it was, as I said, I think in my mind at that time, it was more about, having this experience to sort of make my own money, live on my own in this big city and try something really different.
So was it the realization that you lacked some key skills that led you to get your MBA?
Well, yeah. So I got my MBA. I went back for my MBA 4 years after graduating from Brown. So once I was at that consulting firm for 2 years, and then a friend of my brother's actually from high school was working at this little boutique consulting firm here in Boston, and said, and they did a lot of like pharmaceutical sort of medical consulting, and so biology background is sort of applies to that. And he said, "Oh, we're hiring. You should consider working here." And it was more straight consulting, I would say. It was, what you consider sort of like the Monday to Thursday travel, big, high level strategic problem solving. And I applied to that job in a way that I was like really very intimidated because it was all, it was like a lot of, Harvard folks, and everyone I interviewed with was like incredibly brilliant. And I was like, there's no way I'm getting this job. And I got the job, and I was so excited. I think it was like running in circles. I was so excited because I knew it was going to be, it was sort of like it felt really startup-y. It was like 30 people maybe at the time, maybe not even. And as I said, I knew I was going to be surrounded by these really smart people. So I ended up moving back to Boston and working in a more, what I will say, even more traditional business environment for 2 years, which is then what prompted me to go back to business school. Because then I was like, I haven't taken any econ classes, accounting, like strategy, marketing. I mean, I hadn't done any of that. So I was just learning it on the job, but it felt like I could sort of complete the circle by going back to business school. So, and that was I would say that was a pretty traditional route after some time in consulting, like, the path of graduate from college, work for a few years, and then go back to business school was like, what the path most people were taking at that time who are sort of in business. I think there was like a time after that where a lot of people were going back to the business school like 1 or 2 years after they graduated, like much, much more quickly. And remember, I was still really young. So
yeah.
Even by then I was 24, so I didn't realize it at the time, but I had a lot of time on my hands.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. So how'd you end up working in sports?
So after my MBA, I went back to consulting again. None of the projects that we were working on were sports related, but you get this like really good education in all types of problems, right? Because every industry their challenges are different. But at some point you realize that you're not really an expert in anything.
Right.
You're sort of a really good strategic thinker and problem solver, and you can analyze things to death, but you don't, if I had, and there are lifer consultants for sure, who I think they thrive on like different, having a different project every 3 to 6 months, or maybe as you get older, like staying with one client for a long time and being at more of a directional level. But in any case, at that point, I was sort of like, well, I'm not really an expert in anything. I'd done some work in pharmaceuticals, both in the sales and marketing sides. I'd done some work in publishing for a major newspaper. I'd done some work for a cable company. So I mean, it was really all over the place, and I've always loved sports. I mean, you'll go into, I'll now take a lot of interviews and people will say to me, I love sports. I want to work in sports. And truly that, I was an athlete growing up. I loved to watch sports with my family. And so I had an opportunity. Someone said, you know what, we have at Octagon, we have a client here who's a pharmaceutical company. And, they don't do any major events. They did a lot of sort of like wellness and marathon type events, like running events. But they move very quickly in terms of their thinking, and we need someone who can move along with them. And, I had obviously had some background in pharmaceuticals, so it was just a good match. I mean, in some ways, I want to say it was a little bit lucky, because I think if I ended up being on that client for just maybe 6 months, and then I ended up working on the BMW account for a couple years. But I think if they had been trying to hire for someone for the BMW account, that I would not have been a good fit, right? But there was just something because of my background that made me a good fit for that position specifically. And but it was also an opportunity to just maybe sort of be an expert in something. So that was really probably a very pivotal moment in my career, because I hadn't really been tracking necessarily the sports. And that was like, let's pivot over to sports and sponsorship and event marketing.
So can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you did while at Octagon, some of the events that you worked on?
Yeah. So with BMW, they, there's always a demographic component, right? Which is like they were more into sort of the what I'll call the higher income sponsorships or sports. So they did a bunch of sailing events. They did their own kind of ride and drive test driving type events. They did something called the Drive for the Cure, which I think a lot of people probably knew about. It was a long running program where, every test drive you took in a specific Susan G. Komen branded vehicle, you would every mile was $1 donated to Susan G. Komen. So they had some long running events. They had some sort of straight sponsorships. They had their own events, test driving events. And then they had, every 7 years, every year they like sort of relaunch a vehicle. And a vehicle every 7 years goes through a relaunch. So right when I got there, they were relaunching the 3 Series, which is like a complete redesign. And we had to create an event from nothing, basically, to relaunch it. Now they have like a really interesting consumer base because they have what they call BMW enthusiasts, like people who are just all BMW all the time. They want anything that they're going to give them, right?
Right. They've got the jacket. So, they're wearing the BMW jackets. They've got the hats. Yeah. That's exactly
right. And any event that BMW puts on, they're like first to sign up, and so it was never a question of like, would people attend? It was just more like, what can we do that's totally different? And so when I started, it was sort of immediately when I started, this was our first task, was to figure out what the relaunch of the 3 Series was going to look like. And we ended up creating an event called 3 Across America, where we drove a fleet of 3 Series to, I think it was 40 cities across America. Every city was like, had some kind of iconic location. So, what's a good example? It was a long time ago. But like to the Rock and Roll Museum, we do it in the parking lot of the Rock and Roll Museum, or at a car museum, and it wasn't always a museum, it was like some iconic park or some location where we could drive the fleet and then have people come out and test drive. So essentially we were creating like 40 mini events into this one much larger, I think it was maybe 2 months that we drove the fleet across the country. And so it was, just conceptualizing that, sort of getting the buy-in from BMW management, and then figuring out all the logistics of how we were going to drive these cars across the country. So we hired all these, for the summer, we hired all these interns, and they drove across the country.
Wow.
In these cars. I mean, what's nice is they love, it's like so nice to be able to drive BMWs. So that's not such a bad gig, but it takes a lot of stamina, for that to be your summer internship. But they were great. And then on the ground, we just had to, work with all the sort of iconic locations to figure out, there's some level of partnership with them, how to use those locations and when we would be there and what it would look like on the ground. So it was a lot of work. It was a huge event that was put together pretty quickly. I mean, Octagon is, that's what people sort of rely on them for. And that's what they're, all these kinds of event agencies, like, it's amazing how fast we put that together and how much we were able to do in a really short time.
Did you travel to all 40 cities?
No.
No. Okay.
I sort of popped in and out. I had other things going on, but I went to a bunch of the big events. The finale event was in LA, actually. And it was a concert of the Foo Fighters.
Ooh.
So, so we were planning a concert at the same time as we were driving across the country. And again, like totally, I mean, sight unseen. I'd never planned a concert before, so we were really trying to figure that out at the same time that the cars were going across the country. So
Wow. That
Yeah,
sounds like
I
fun.
popped in and out. Yeah, it was fun. I mean, it was, yeah, I mean, when I say it was like a huge endeavor, it really, 40 mini events plus a giant concert when you have really not a lot of experience doing any of that. But incredible team, of, again, problem solvers, people who were like, I'm totally up for taking this on and sort of, knocking it out of the park. So yeah, we did that. And then at the same time, we were managing their other events that were long running and, yeah, that were, would usually go throughout the year.
Now, how big was the group that was managing this project?
The Three Across America project.
Yeah.
There was, so I with a colleague managed the team as a whole. The entire BMW team, I want to say, was maybe 15 people. And so there was one manager for Three Across America and probably 10 interns.
Gotcha. And
so the interns it wouldn't count in the 15.
Gotcha. Now, if you're able to tell us, what do the budgets for something like this look like?
I'm not able to tell you because I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't remember what the budget was for it. It was a really long time ago.
Okay. But it sounds like a super fun project. And like you said, the problem solving piece, right? I think
the other thing, yeah, sorry to interrupt you. The other thing that's super fun about things like that is like when you have such a engaged audience, everywhere we went, like people, all they wanted to do was see. So this is the new 3 Series, right? So this is like the unveiling. So they haven't seen it in the dealerships or they only see it through this event. And usually there's like food and drink and people are, there's sort of a nice reception around it. And they couldn't be happier to see you and ask you 1,000 questions about the car. So yeah, in that way, it's like, when you have such a welcoming audience, that's what makes it really fun. And then working as a team like that for, 2 months straight, is really fulfilling.
No question. Well, and like you said, right? Like upper scale products and brands and events, there's a different feel to them, right? I mean, we were involved in tennis for a little while. And, the sponsors are Mercedes-Benz and Louis Vuitton and Emirates. And, there's just a very cool atmosphere surrounding those types of events.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so nice to have, I guess a little bit in contrast to what we have now, like it's just so many resources, such a big company behind you, obviously an international company. So it's not just BMW in North America, even though those were our clients, we had the resources of Germany as well. And and they don't hold back. They do a great job.
So I want to talk about problem solving quickly because, it seems to be a theme in your career thus far. Were you always a good problem solver? Or is this something that you think that you developed along the way as a result of just working in so many different industries and in different gigs?
It's a great question. I think science is very much science and math. That's a lot of what you're sort of trained to do or your test taking is about solving problems. So that's probably part of it. And then, sort of just liking that challenge. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, maybe just sort of just training as a problem solver, but, I think in any work that we're ever doing is sort of, I've never really thought about this, but I think it is problem solving, right? It's like, all day, every day as you and I are trying to plan events, they never go as we think they're going to go. And so you are always solving problems, you know what I mean? And one of the first things, so that job that I had after the second consulting jobs, right before I went to Kellogg, where I was surrounded by all those uber smart people. There were like I will say it was probably the best work experience I will ever have. And I obviously love TBT, and I'm having an incredible experience at TBT, but I learned so much about how to conduct myself in business. And one of our main principles was like, be solution oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Don't, having a conversation to have a conversation and kind of keep going back and forth. We're always tracking towards something, right? You're tracking towards a solution. And it was a really good lesson. That's what our clients were paying us to be. And it's just really helpful in daily life too, which is like, talk about it as you need to talk about it, learn all the ins and outs and what's affecting your decision, but always like be tracking towards a solution.
Absolutely. No, and
I don't know if that's like a very obvious thing to say, but it's like, I just remember like using that term a lot when we were there.
Yeah. And I mean, in a similar note, just problem solving and being able to shift gears, solve problems, deal with pressure. Like that's been a common theme for those who have been on the podcast thus far, is just, as far as advice that we could possibly give people that are trying to break into sports or, excel at their jobs. It's, learn to be comfortable with problems and become a solutions person and a problem solver. And, you're likely to always have a gig. You really are, because if you can help me get to where I want to go, you've always got a seat at the table. Right. And so the key is really figuring out how you can help people. I think that's really that's at least been the key to my career thus far is, meeting the right people, helping them in any way I can and helping them solve their problems. And I think if you can do that and learn to do that effectively, you'll always have a seat at the table.
Well, I think something you just said was really key is like being comfortable with problems. Like, I think in any job you ever have, like things aren't always going to go the way you want. And if you can either be like super flustered by that, or you can kind of take it as it comes, like try to, think about it wisely and calmly.
Sure.
So that's part of it. And then I think being solution oriented means you also have to be a bit decisive. You have to be able to say what you think and communicate that well and have an opinion. I think people really are paying you to have an opinion.
Right.
And, to do all the research. But even thinking about what research you're supposed to do, right? You're always in that way. Problem solving is not just it on its own. It's all those other sort of surrounding pieces that will make you really valuable to any organization, I think.
Yeah. And you said, we were talking about business, but life in general, right? Life in general is about solving problems and being able to be resilient. So definitely a skill that everybody should develop as best as they can. I want to move on a little bit here. How many years did you spend at Octagon?
So I was at Octagon for about 2.5 years, I think. Not very long.
And what made you decide to leave?
That was actually more of a personal decision. I got married while I was there, and without going through a super long story, my husband had his mom passed away right before we got married, and he needed a break, and he suggested that we go travel the world. And I had just gotten promoted at Octagon, and I remembered, not only for myself, and I don't know that even, sort of my boss looked at it this way, but, there weren't a lot of women in the upper ranks there. And, being promoted as a woman was sort of a big thing at that time. Mm-hmm. Not that there weren't women in management, and not that there, that women weren't getting promoted, but it was like symbolic in a way. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of felt like I was like, not just holding the torch for myself, but for, some of my team and some others around me. So it wasn't a great time to leave and travel the world. But he needed it. And over the course of several months, convinced me that we should, that there was really not another time in our lives that we'd be able to do this, without without kids. We obviously didn't have kids at the time, or we'd be doing it when we were 60 and traveling the world. When you're 60 is just different than traveling the world when you're 30, early 30s.
Right.
So we rented out our apartment that we owned in New York, and we stored all of our things in my friend's basement in New Jersey. And we left with one bag each and no itinerary, and traveled for about 18 months around the world.
That's incredible. So you went to 40 different countries or so?
About 40 different countries, maybe a little shy of 40. We slowed down as we went. So we were really fast out of the gates, went to Europe. We had the first 2 weeks of our trip we had planned. We went to Poland and then to the World Cup in Germany.
Wow.
And, a little side benefit was that Octagon, works on the World Cup. So I saw some of my colleagues out there, and some friends of ours met us out there. But after 2 weeks, we had no idea where we were going to go, actually. So the first, and, this is like really going to date me, but at this time there was like, barely Facebook, no TripAdvisor or, Booking.com, all those, there were no brands like that, so we were cross-referencing like Lonely Planet books and, the New York Times website to figure out like where to stay and what to visit. So the first night that we were like taking a train into the city in Austria without like a hotel reservation, I was convinced we were going to be sleeping on the street. And I was like, okay, I was like preparing myself to like figure out how to sleep on the street. But it turns out that even if you're traveling in Europe in the summer, there's always and we were just a couple, right? So we didn't have any kids. So, there's always somewhere to stay. Like you're maybe not going to stay at, the nicest place. And frankly, that wasn't really the budget we were on, but I also like, before we left, was like, we're not staying in hostels. So, we're a little bit beyond that. So there was like tons of like family run inns, really cheap, really clean, really nice. So we ended up staying there that night. I remember that night very distinctly, but after that, it was just sort of a mix. We would meet people on the street and they would say, while you're here, you have to go there. It was sort of traveling like a local too, because we had time, so it was like if the flight didn't work one day, or if there wasn't a flight the next day, we just take it the day after, or we didn't do a lot of flying. We did a lot of trains, renting cars, just flying between continents more than between cities.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah. So about 6 months in Europe, 3 months in Africa. We came home for a wedding and Christmas, and then back out to Asia for the rest of the time.
Wow, that's incredible. So I mean, we could talk. I could ask you.
We can talk about that.
We could talk about this for hours. But for those that are listening, what are some of the things that you think you gained from that trip? I mean, obviously, whenever you travel, I feel like the benefit of traveling is that you get outside your bubble, you get a new perspective on life, and you really see how big the world actually is. I'm curious, what are some of your key takeaways from your travels?
Yeah, well, so I was like part of a pretty active family growing up. So my parents, while they didn't have a lot of money, particularly when we were really small, travel was something that they really wanted to expose us to. And so there were quite a few, big-ish trips, like not expensive in any way, but like big, sort of like we went to Alaska and we went to China for a month as a family. So we did, there were sort of some big trips that I remember taking when I was little. And so, and my husband the same way. And so travel was kind of in his blood too. But I think what we always loved about traveling was, well, first in this trip, I mean, I thought my worldview expanded by exponentially. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about the world, and then, sort of sitting in a cafe, chatting with people about, the United States, you get a really interesting perspective on what they thought of us, rather than just sort of what we think about the rest of the world. And Also just like, being in different countries and understanding like their leadership or, their habits or, just the way they live is so interesting to like sort of inform the way you want to live. But the other thing is like, we try to travel with our kids now because it sort of requires a level of, again, back to the problem solving, but like level of flexibility. It's like you're not always gonna things aren't always going to go right when you're traveling either. It's like,
Sure.
I don't know, your hotel room is not available, or like you don't, you can't find a place to eat, or, you have to sort of figure out a lot on your own. And, yeah, I mean, I love, how adventurous it feels, I guess,
Sure.
trying to like, get by in a place where I don't know the language, for example, and they don't speak English, or trying to cobble together my Chinese, which is pretty rough. So, I love that part of it too. And then just discovering like something you never thought you would come upon, something really beautiful or some tradition, or just like one thing Vietnam is like one of my favorite places, and people are incredibly friendly there. They live typically in one house all together, many generations of the family. All the money is kind of pooled together. So they're all supporting each other. Huge respect for, elders. So like, just as an example of just like watching the way people live and what they prioritize is like really good to kind of make us all think about how we want to be, how we want to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love to travel myself. And like I said, we may have to do a podcast at some point soon regarding all of your travels, because I want to hear more. But yeah,
that doesn't surprise me that you like travel. Like I feel like we probably like it for the same reasons. It's
the adventure, right? And it's funny you mentioned that term, because my wife and I decide on a big trip every single year, right? And she's proposed some places before where I've said not enough adventure, right? Like, yeah, that place sounds great, but I want to go far, right? I want to be immersed in a culture that's completely different than what I've ever experienced. Like, I want adventure. So I think that that sense of adventure is definitely what has driven my travels and will continue to do so. It's a big world out there. Big world out there. And one of the guests on the show, Matteo Zurretti, is the head of the NBA Players Association's marketing, international marketing, I'm sorry. And so he had a very interesting view on, the global game of basketball and traveling. And again, I mean, the message is that, he's a global citizen and it's a big world out there. So highly encourage all of our listeners to really think deeply about that.
Yeah. I mean, that gives you a lot of perspective about your own sort of, who you are and your own being. It's like humbling, and it's,
it makes you realize too that, some of the things that you're dealing with on a day-to-day really don't matter. Right. And again, we could talk about that for hours as well, but,
we could do another podcast on that.
We absolutely could. But so you left the States for 18 months.
Yep.
And you finally came back. Did you come back because you were just tired, or you had seen enough? What made you want to come back?
There was a family illness. So my husband's grandfather was ill and needed our care. And so we flew back thinking that we would probably go back out once we, had spent some time with him. But we came back to Boston, and as my husband likes to say, the air was super fresh. The Red Sox were on fire. Mm-hmm. And we, all the family was around because his grandfather was ill. And I think a little bit, you don't realize how much you miss people while you're having this incredible adventure. But then when you get back, you realize, how important, obviously, our family was to us. And we kind of didn't get the momentum back to go back out. And so I came back without a job, obviously, into a new city, and thinking I'd go back to New York, but we couldn't go back to New York. The consumerism, the pace of New York was something that we just were no longer used to. We hadn't had a cell phone for 2 years, 18 months. And, with sort of the not the consumerism and the commercialism, just almost like the bright lights and the craziness of commercials. Like we hadn't even really watched much TV, and it's weird to say now because you can fall back into that so easily. Right. But,
sure.
When we first sort of landed back, we were really turned off a little bit by all of that. And, so couldn't really see ourselves going back to New York. Still needed to settle some things in Boston, and just ended up staying. I got pregnant with my daughter the next year. So we came back in the fall of 2007, and she was born in the fall of 2008.
I mean, it sounds like your perspective on life had completely changed as the result of your travels.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when I tell the story in a shorter version to people, I say it was not the best time to leave, right? I was in my early 30s. I was in a great time in my career, at a job I was really loving. So it couldn't have really sort of been in that way a worse time to go, but I learned so much, on that trip about the world and about myself, that I wouldn't take that back for anything.
No, that's quite a trip. I'm very, very jealous. But
So then I came back without a job though, which was a little I guess just another problem to solve. So and I got pregnant, so it was sort of when do I start working again, with a little one on the way. I actually had a really good friend who was at Google. So we make some, bad decisions in our life. She was like, you should definitely come work for me at Google. I, work in Boston. I think you'd be great in this position. Google hadn't had its peak yet. And that would have been a great job to take or even consider. But I was very pregnant, and I still wanted to work in sports. So I sort of wanted to stay. I'd probably be way wealthier at this point, but also maybe a lot less happy. So I passed that up. And then a friend of mine introduced me to this woman who was trying to build this children's soccer company. And it was, I think, the more the entrepreneurial nature of that was interesting than the necessarily, children's soccer, or that being in sports. It was I was helping them to grow a business from pretty, not the ground up. They were very established in New York, but they wanted to expand to Boston and didn't have, it was, they wanted to expand. First of all, this would have been their first expansion, and they didn't really have anyone to do it or a plan for how to do that. So I think about 6 weeks after my daughter was born, I started that job.
And you worked there until 2012, is that right?
I worked there until 2011. And then actually TBT, we started talking about TBT in 2011. I worked there for a couple years. It was a little bit crazy. I had a little one. I ended up having another little one in 2010, and I was the only person running the business and trying to grow the business. There were a lot of coaches and other folks working with me, but I was, for at least a year, the only person running the business. So I was...
You were busy.
I was busy, yeah. And I was tired. And I think I was a little bit out of my mind. I didn't know what I was doing. But that's what happens when you have kids. Sometimes it's you really can't think straight. And so in 2011, I ended up leaving there and took the summer off. which again, I obviously had taken time to travel, but I'd never really worked. Like I think in my family, like you don't take time off. Like you find another job and then you leave and you go to that one,
Right.
And so I took a couple months off, and I sort of am a believer that like the energy you put out into the world is what you get back. So I decided I was going to like give myself a break for a little bit, and then I didn't leave the children's soccer company like feeling great about it. So my dad gave me like a really good piece of advice, and he was like, just find your next thing. Like find the thing that that's going to like, kind of set your mind on fire again. Like go find the next thing and put the other stuff behind you. And I met John Mugar through a mutual connection, and he had this crazy idea. And, I was sort of open to it because I was like, again, it was totally entrepreneurial, hadn't been started. And it was a big idea and like really a little bit crazy. Like if, I put it in front of my old boss at Octagon for a little bit, and he was like, okay,
Yeah.
But I wasn't doing anything else at the time. And so I said, I'll help you figure it out. I mean, what he really needed at the time was a reality show. So what he really needed was to figure out how to put it out to market, get sponsors interested potentially. But how do we explain this thing to people? And at the time it was a 1,000 team participative tournament for $10 million was the idea. But a reality show. So much more the stories of the people who would participate in this. And maybe less so like the straight basketball. So I worked for him on a part-time basis for a while, just trying to sort of put it together, I knew what sponsors needed. I'd never been on the sales side, and I really wasn't trying to be a salesperson. It was more like, how do you go to market? How do we launch this thing? And so worked on that for a while until, let's see, our first year that we put it on was 2014. So maybe lightly in 2011, we talked about it more seriously in 2012 and 13. We tried to sell it as a reality show. We got really close, but those kinds of contracts that you enter into are like in perpetuity. So it was like, if we're going to do this, we want it forever. And that was like a big commitment to make for something that we didn't know how big it was going to be. So we ended up, John, I think, made a really good decision. He's like, look, like people don't buy this stuff if they've never seen it. Like, it's just like you have a pilot for a TV show.
Right.
Like we should pilot this tournament and see if like people will play for $500,000 and see if fans will sign up to support these teams. And we had no marketing budget, and we're like, but we need to put it on so people can, sort of just like you sort of need to touch and feel something, you like grasp what it is and what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, can you explain to the audience what the TBT has become at this point?
Yeah. So right now it's a $2 million, so what we call high stakes, winner take all basketball tournament. It happens for 3 weeks now in the summer. Again, now in 8 regions around the country, with an 18 championship in a 9th region. It's due to end of July, early August. It's mostly overseas professionals who play in the event. Teams create themselves and apply on our website. So it's all sort of social media driven. They're selected now in an at-large fashion, and 64 teams play winner take all for $2 million on ESPN.
No, it's absolutely a fantastic concept, and a property that's really gaining a lot of steam. Your current role is that of or can you tell the audience what your current title is with TBT?
Yeah. So, co-founder and executive vice president of partnerships.
Okay.
Partnerships is a bit of a catch-all. So for the first 4 years of the tournament, I essentially ran the event, the physical event. So all the logistics on the ground. But that, bleeds into, a lot of other things when you're a small company. So who our internal team was. So I did a lot of the hiring. Who our agency partners were, because we don't, we have a small team and we outsource a lot. Mm-hmm. Our partnerships on the ground. So yeah, sort of a general sort of operations role in that way for the first 4 years. And then since then I've sort of moved into, our partnerships have changed. And so my role has changed a little bit. I do, less, if not sort of none, of the logistics on the ground of the event itself. We have an amazing event team that does that now. And I work with our sponsor partners and our regional partnerships on the ground. So really like site selection and relationship development in both those areas.
Now, I definitely want to talk about the partnerships and sponsorships and all that good stuff, but you were responsible for basically building the template for what each event would look like, right?
Yes. Yep. Not alone, but yes.
I'm curious, you've probably done a lot of hiring as far as event staff goes. And, a great way to break into sports is to, intern or become part of the staff of an event, right? I'm curious, what did you think was the common thread as far as people who were the most useful as volunteers or interns for events? And do you have any advice for people who are volunteering for events?
Yeah, I do. I mean, as I alluded to earlier, I think a lot of the interviews that we've had, in our now 7 years, or maybe 8 that we've been working on it is, the first thing is I love sports and I want to do anything in sports. And which is great, because that's important for, for what we do. But, you also have to have a skill, like what is it that you're going to do for us? Are you, is marketing your expertise? Is sales your expertise? Like, what's your functional skill? And granted, interns, you don't expect them necessarily to have that, right? That's what they're trying to develop. Mm-hmm. But at least some direction of like what you're interested in, do you want to be, on the content side? Do you want to be working on social media? Do you want to be capturing content on site? Do you want to be in PR? Do you want to interview players and work with media? So at least some idea of, kind of what drives you, what you're passionate about, I think is really important. And then having a passion for the idea in the event, which is usually, for us, like everybody comes with that. They've heard of TBT somehow. And they reach out to us sometimes blindly, sometimes they, it's very rarely that they hear about us through us, Right. It's more like they've watched it on TV. They know it's coming to their school, for example, through their sports business program or something like that. And they reach out to us, but I think the common thread is that they, have an incredible work ethic and they're really passionate about what they want to do.
Sure. And that's been a common theme with just about every guest. And that's, every guest that's been on the show who's been in a position to hire people has stated that, right?
Yeah.
Problem solving, like we discussed, passion, and really just being willing to put in the work. It's kind of as simple as that when you first getting in.
And you kind of can't make it up. I mean, there's no reason to make it up. You know what I mean? Like, it's very real. You can probably feel it when you talk to people. Most of the people that we've hired have started as interns, and you can feel that they really believe in it or want to do it. And as a result, they've done their research. They're really well prepared for the interview. But you can hear it in their voice, and I, if I had any piece of advice, I would say follow what you really want to do. It's, follow what you're passionate about, because you'll be way better at that. You'll be really good at that because you innately want it.
Mm-hmm. And willing to put in the time, right? I mean, if you don't have the passion, how are you going to put in the time? And sports is not an easy industry as far as the time commitment goes. So I think, again, that's been another key for all the people who've been on the show, is just if you don't have the passion, the fact of the matter is people are just going to outwork you, because there's plenty of people out there with the passion.
Yeah.
So.
And, and you and I both know there's a lot of extra hours that sometimes go in, like we're on site we used to travel straight for a month, and the events are on the weekends. So it's not, during the year, it's very steady, but during the tournament, or for you during summer league, it's like all hands on deck all the time. Like it feels like 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're gonna have to draw on that passion, to want to work like that.
Absolutely. Can you walk through, I mean, at this point, you're very heavily involved in sponsorships and partnerships. As far as the sponsors of the event goes, can you walk through who those sponsors are and generally, what the sponsors are getting as far as the relationship goes with TBT? At least at a high level?
We had the best story about TBT is that we had a sponsor partner, one of our first sponsors, reach out to us through our info box, like 3 days before an event, before a tournament was supposed to start. And I was like,
Wow.
We're really interested in sponsoring this. Can we do it? And in 3 days, we literally put a sponsorship together and had them represented in the event. They're not with us anymore, but they had a really great vision for the partnership, which was awesome. I mean, that's you don't, obviously that doesn't happen very often.
That does not happen. No, I've never heard of that before. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. And, they went in they went in sort of a different direction once the new CMO came in. So I don't think it was anything about the partnership that made it go away. It was really awesome for the couple years that we had it. But now our major sponsors are Puma, Zell, and last year we also had the Air Force Reserve. We're in a sales cycle now, but obviously weird time to be selling sponsorships. But mostly what's so great about our partnerships, just backing up, is that they make sense. Like, I think there are some partnerships that almost feel like two companies are sort of forced together. Mm-hmm. So what's really nice about, for example, our Puma partnership is that, they're trying to get back into basketball. They are back in basketball now. But at the time they were sort of relaunching themselves after 20 years of being outside of basketball. And so they feel like, in that way, sort of that arm of it feels entrepreneurial too, right? Making their own way, proving basketball to be an important pillar in what they do. Mm-hmm. A bit disruptive, to the system that's existed for a long time. So, we're aligned strategically and sort of in thought that way.
Sure.
And spirit, which is great, because I think all partnerships don't always feel that way. And they, so every time we're selling a sponsorship, the first question we ask is what are their goals? Right? Because that's really what we're trying to figure out for them. The value that we bring to them is to try to figure out what are their larger goals and where would this sponsorship fit in? And they have a partnership with the NBA now, and getting back into basketball. They wanted to do something that felt more grassroots, not maybe all the way grassroots to the AAU level, which is what a lot of big apparel companies do as well. And so TBT sort of fit the bill for that because it felt elite and it felt professional, but at the same time, it felt like more, what we sort of wanted when we started TBT was like, sort of bring professional sports back to fans, right? Like,
yeah.
When we first started it, it was sort of like, it was like not affordable for a lot of people to go to a professional basketball game or to be anywhere close to, to seeing the people that they wanted to see, or, the whole bottom row of seating is like corporate seating, and so, we kind of was like, and look, I get it. It's like a big business, but we just, we wanted to be something different in that way. We wanted to sort of bring it back to fans. And I think they had that same sort of, they saw that in us. And so they wanted to do something that was, again, grassroots, but sort of elite. So not yet at the, necessarily at the high school level or anything like that. They wanted it still to be a sort of a professional event, but feel like a little bit more on the ground, if that makes any sense. So what they've wanted really is, some, co-branding, some media. We obviously are, partnered with ESPN. There's this thread of discussion of sort of endemic partners. So they provide a lot of the needs that we have from an apparel standpoint, uniforms and staff apparel. So that also just helps us with some of our costs. And then they do one big event with us every year, which so far has been the dunk contest. But again, in the spirit of being a little bit different, that's a posterized dunk contest. So not quite the dunk contest you see everywhere else. And then Zell came on last year. They've never, I think this is right, I don't think they've ever done a sponsorship before in sports. But with a $2 million payment, it was someone's great idea to make that happen through Zell. So that's been really, they're also, they're kind of like a behind the scenes brand. They do stuff, I would say, more through their banking partners. Like you'll see Zell through your banking partner, less so just promoted as a brand itself.
Right.
So they, it was, great for their brand to sort of be out front. They're doing the payment or, showing the technical ability, to have a payment show up in your bank account, very quickly. And so we had $2 million of payments, obviously going out very quickly. And we did it with them. And, that partnership, I think, will expand going forward. But, so some of it is, usually, as straight sort of signage and branding, in conjunction with the event. And some of it is like much more specific to what their marketing and strategic direction is, whether it's to highlight technical abilities or to highlight, the people who are using Zell. So just sort of, being flexible to work with them on using our assets to help them highlight those things.
Right. And one of the things I want to underscore that you said is that, you always start your sponsorship sales talks with getting an understanding of what the sponsor wants to accomplish, right? And what is it that they're trying to do? And I think that's what good selling's all about, right? Is not really selling, but creating a win-win situation. And, I appreciate you breaking those both down, because one of the things that, I talk about, I speak at universities every once in a while and speak at USC pretty often. One of the things that I tell students who want to break into sports is that as you're, if you're looking at a social media feed or a website or marketing collateral or a broadcast, like really look at who the sponsors are and try to get a good understanding for what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And when you start to do that, that's when you kind of go from being just a fan who loves sports, which is great, to somebody who, might have a chance in the business, right? Because it's not all fun and games. It's a lot of hard work. There's sponsors, there's broadcasts, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different pillars to each and every event that you watch. But yeah, I mean, so important to be able to really look at what brands are trying to do, because it is a business, right? I mean, it is.
And there's sort of a service component to it. It's like, I think the consulting work that I did was like all client service, right? So ultimately you're sort of taking direction from someone else and you're trying to give them everything that they want. And in the way of sponsorship, it's like from a property standpoint, it's actually a good maybe perspective to have, which is like, we're wanting to work together and walk side by side. But there's a component of like, really trying to service their needs, and I think, as I was saying, there are some partnerships that are sort of feel very forced, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And, those are going to happen, I think, a little bit less often.
Yes, for sure.
Because maybe, and ultimately maybe not last as long. But yeah, I think it's an important point that you make, that, this is sort of like, really a true integration is that everybody knows what everybody else is trying to achieve and is working together to do that.
Right. And, there's another topic we could talk about forever, and you would know this better than I, but, the days of brands just throwing money at random events are over, based on the fact that, most of the brands who have the money to invest, they've got stockholders and, they need to prove ROI, and the analytics are out there at this point to be able to determine the value of these sponsorships. So, people are definitely spending their money from a sponsorship perspective a lot more mindfully than I think they used to.
Yeah. And by the way, there's a lot of choice for them, I mean,
oh yeah.
Even in basketball, but outside of basketball, just in sports in general, like there's so many places that they could potentially be. So how are you different? Or, how are you going to serve some need that they can't, have served somewhere else?
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, just how are you strategically aligned? I think that's one of the key things that I've taken away from this conversation, is just being strategically aligned and how important that is, because that's how you move forward together in a way that really makes sense, right? If you mentioned Puma, right? And kind of disruption, and TBT is all about disruption. And so it just makes sense, right? The culture and the vision for what you're trying to accomplish, it just makes sense. And I think it just allows for better collaboration.
Yes. Agreed.
So we're starting to run out of time here. Appreciate the time, all of the time that you've given us today. And before we go, I want to ask, do you have any routines or habits that might be useful for the audience to hear about?
Our time went fast. Yes. I don't know. I mean, I'm a big list builder. So
okay.
at the end of every day, if I can, and certainly at the end of a Friday when we're kind of going into the weekend, and, you might put work a little bit to the side for, some time, I usually make myself like a pretty extensive list of, sort of what I need to do, where conversations are at. So I'm a big list person, and I like to cross things off the list.
Now, how does that take shape? Is that paper? Is that Evernote?
I usually use the notes on my just on my Mac.
Okay.
My notes app. Because you can share those and you can print those, and they're ever evolving. So, and I can access them from my phone or my computer. So, it's sometimes like as I'm on a conversation, I might be just jotting it down by hand, and then I'll translate it into my computer. I don't love to be typing while I'm on the phone. So that's, so I think that's a big thing I do. I think there's there's not a lot of, I think do sort of what works for you to stay organized, and, but I think there's like some big general habits, you know, which is like try to listen, try to be open-minded, try to be solution-oriented. Like those are not, you know, probably the habits that you're necessarily alluding to, but there's just sort of a way of being around the team and for myself that I think is like really fundamental to how I do my job.
Sure, absolutely. What about favorite books? Do you have any favorite books?
Favorite books? Oh, that's a tough one. Honestly, I was not a huge reader when I was growing up, and I've delved back into reading more vigorously as of late. But I don't know that any of the books would be interesting to the people that are listening to this.
That's okay.
Because I read a lot of female writers talking about personal experiences. So I recently read the book Know My Name, which was like, I was on the plane crying as I was reading that. She's an incredible writer, and it's the book written by the woman who was a victim of assault at Stanford.
Okay.
And then I don't know. I've read these again. These are not going to be, I feel like, are interesting to anybody who's listening to this. Now I'm reading the newest book by Glennon Doyle. She wrote Love Warrior, and now she's Untamed. I'm not like a big business book reader, I have to say, and I know you are, Serge.
Yeah,
you told me that.
But that's
I don't
okay.
read a lot of business books. I think I try to read a lot of books about kind of like mental health and how to be, you know, how to like stay balanced.
And you know what? That is a very, very important topic. And, you know, so I don't judge, by the way. And I find the truth of the matter is
myself.
I don't do that, because the truth of the matter is, you know, like you said, I like business books, but at the same time, you know, getting out of your comfort zone is a good thing. And, you know, learning from other people's perspectives is a very, very good thing. So I'm always looking for, you know, new books and genres that I may not have picked up myself, especially from people that I respect. So don't judge yourself.
Yeah, I should spend more time thinking about that question, because there are other books that I will recommend to you at a later date.
Okay. Well, if you think of any after the conversation, feel free to send them over, and I'll make sure to include them in the show notes after the fact.
Okay. Sounds good.
A few final questions.
Sure.
What do you believe to have been the keys to your success thus far?
I think hard work is really key. I think everyone's always been able to rely on me to work hard and to be there when I'm needed. Mm-hmm. Intellectual curiosity, I think, is a huge one. I not just, you know, I sort of take some pride in this, but I think I've seen this in a lot of other people as well, which is to just know more about just what you're doing, you know, like read the newspaper, read whatever it is, you know, read articles online about different subjects, not just about sports because, you know, that all that comes into play as you work. I think, you know, you and I were talking a little bit about how, you know, I was a biology major, and so there's like a lot of science happening right now around the virus and how it applies to what we can do this summer. And it all kind of comes into play of like being a resource and mm-hmm. knowing a lot about different things gives you a really good perspective on what you're trying to do in your work. So curiosity is a huge thing. And I think you can develop that. I don't think that you're just born with that.
I agree. And if you don't mind, how much time would you say you spend reading a day?
Less than I would like. I usually am pretty tired at the end of the day when I try to read. So I fall asleep pretty quickly, but I would say in the morning, I sort of survey the news and I try to, bookmark a few articles for myself every day to read. Whether right now it's like a lot of news, obviously, about sports and how the virus is affecting sports, but also about testing and antibodies and the science. And then I try to read sort of like general. I try to put myself in the shoes of the people who are watching TBT or watching sports. I'm one of those naturally, right? But what are they reading? What are they thinking about? So, yeah, I would say I read the newspaper, the headlines every day. I probably end up spending an hour reading.
Okay.
Every day. I would love to read more. John and I once had this conversation where we said we should every day dedicate 2 hours to just reading.
Yeah,
I think there are some, and maybe you told me this too. There are some, sort of big thought leaders who do that, like from 8 to 10 every morning. They just read, and then they get about their day, or during lunch, or whatever it is.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, Warren Buffett is certainly one of them. Bill Gates, Mark Cuban, I know spends a lot of time. One of my mentors, George Raveling, spends a ton of time reading every single day. So definitely a lot of benefits to it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how.
I think it's hard. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, for me, that's the way that, I mean, I'm intellectually curious as well, but that's also how I connect dots. Right. And I think that's the key. And when I talk to young people about, the benefits of it, I mean, that's really how you learn to connect dots, is by learning and then doing. And, you talked about biology and science and experimenting and testing hypotheses. Like that's really the way that you gain new information and knowledge, is by reading. So I think it's certainly a skill that if you don't have currently, that, if you can make the time to develop, you absolutely should.
And it doesn't have to be, there are some people I realize who are not readers. Like, as I told you, when I was little, I was mostly playing sports. So I didn't have a lot of time to read. My brother always had his nose in a book. But it doesn't have to be like that. It can be reading articles online. There's so much content, these days. You can find it anywhere. And whether it's a magazine or a newspaper or an online article, you don't have to dig into this giant book. But I see it everywhere. It's like, even when I'm talking to my partners, to be thoughtful and to be knowledgeable and thoughtful about what's happening in the world is a huge part of like the context of our conversation. So I think it's important to be able to have conversations outside of what you're specifically needing to work on together. And I see it internally, when we're sort of debating concepts, and you sort of send an article to your whole team about, just to give them something to think about, and maybe potentially a new perspective on the problem.
That's it. Something to think about. Finally, do you have any requests or asks for the audience?
Oh, do I have any requests? No, I'm like, that makes me laugh, because I'm sort of the behind the scenes, like, try to be there for everyone person. So as I told you before, I'm sort of doing this more for you and less for myself. But yeah, like, feedback would be great. If there's any questions about TBT, I think if people have thoughts about TBT and ideas, we're always open to new ideas about where TBT could go.
That's fantastic. Where can people find you?
They can find me, I don't know what people customarily give. I'm on all the social media platforms. My Twitter is TBT Todd. Okay. And my email is Jenn@thetournament.com, Jenn with one N @thetournament.com. So they can find me at either of those places for sure.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Jenn. I know it's certainly an interesting time, and I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation. And I know next time I need travel advice, I know who I'm going to.
Great. I'm here for you. It was really fun, and thank you for having me. And I'm super excited for us to be working together too.
Me too. And hopefully we can do a part 2 at some point soon.
Sounds good.
And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with TBT co-founder and executive vice president, Jennifer Todd. You can find the show notes for everything we discussed at sportsbusinessclassroom.com/Jennifer-Todd. Ladies and gentlemen, if you learned something from this episode, please share it with your friends, family, and anyone you think might be able to get something out of it. And if you really got a lot of value, please take a few minutes to review the show on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. And as always, we want to hear from you. We do this show for you, so if you have any follow-up questions for Jennifer or myself, you can leave a comment on the site and send us your questions on social media by tagging us at Sports Business Classroom. As always, big thank you to our sponsors, Sports Business Classroom Online and Hall Pass Media, and thanks again for listening. Stay safe out there. We'll see you here next week on the Sports Business Classroom audio experience.